Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, and many other shows, which I'm sure many of you are aware of and love and will watch again and again and again. So, this is my second Mr. Sci-Fi video on Lost in Space. I've watched all 10 hours of Lost in Space, and so now I can have opinions about the entire show. And of course, in the old days, each episode was a self-contained unit, like in the original Lost in Space back in the 60s, but now the entire season tells one story. It's an arcing story, usually with a cliffhanger at the end. Now, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen all 10 hours or if you care about disappointment, don't watch this. But if you have or are apathetic toward your emotional palate, great. So overall, I really liked the show. I really enjoyed it and found it entertaining. There's still great weaknesses in the show. There was something back in the days of serials, old Republic serials, movie serials. They used to have when you went to movie theaters, there'd be a double bill, and there'd be a newsreel, and there'd be a cartoon, and there'd be maybe a short comic subject like the Three Stooges or Laurel and Hardy or whatever, and then there'd also be a serial. And these were serialized stories. They're sort of like arcing stories in TV shows now, multi-part stories that were broken into half hours generally. Flash Gordon was one, Buck Rogers, and earlier on there was something called The Perils of Pauline, and they would often cheat so that they would end with a cliffhanger where it was like something terrible happening to the heroes, where it'd be like, how on earth could they possibly get out of that? And then the next episode would begin with them having escaped, and they wouldn't even explain how they got out. And so, for instance, they would frequently have our heroes are in an airplane, and it flies into a mountainside and explodes. It's like, my God! And then next week it'd be like, well, glad we got out of that. Okay. So Lost in Space sometimes does that. And so, for instance, it has Don West is in a ship trying to offload fuel, and it goes down a cliff, and it crashes, and there's no way he possibly could have gotten out. But then he's hanging by the cliff edge, and he pulls himself up, and they say, "How did you do that?" And he says, "I'm a badass princess." And then they make a joke about him saying he's a badass princess, and we're on to the next adventure. But that was a cheat, and it was clear that they didn't quite know how they were going to get him out. So they just kind of said, well, let's just keep moving. And over and over, they have these cliffhangers, and sometimes they'll extricate themselves through an unlikely thing, like they're trapped in a tar pit. They've got a rope from their ship from the chariot to a tree, and the hatch is open, and they could easily just jump out and climb up the rope. And Maureen says to John, "No, it's too late." And so they close the hatch and they sink below the tar, and then it's like, well, we're trapped. And then they use a balloon to crawl through a helium balloon to get out. It's like, oh, in reality, would that work? I'm very dubious. So there's that stuff, and it's like where you kind of wince, or and the actor who plays Don West, in the original Lost in Space, it was played by Mark Goddard, and he was very handsome, and he and Judy had kind of a thing going, and they were both very attractive people, and in this, I really like the actress playing Judy. She's African American, or you could say mixed race, and they established that Maureen had a previous relationship, and John has basically treated Judy as his daughter, and she sees him as her dad, and I think that's terrific, and I really like it, and I like the actress. But then Don West is kind of this kind of guy with a paunch, and he's not in great shape, and he's kind of sleazy and not really charming, and he looks about 40, though he's probably younger. But it's like, and I hope that they're not going to have them get together as a couple, because it's kind of, they have no chemistry, but we'll see where that leads. But but it's like, oh. And again, those of us who have worked on shows a lot, what you try to do is you watch where there is chemistry and where there isn't, and you guide your actors and your characters toward what actually works. And bad shows, or less good shows, let's say, less effective shows, they just kind of jam the actors and the characters wherever they intend them to go, and they aren't present to that. So we'll see what happens. But overall, the things I like about the show, generally I like the cast. I think the actor playing Maureen is good. The actor playing Judy, as I mentioned, is wonderful. The actor playing Will is not bad at all. Will Robinson, Penny is, I think she's a good actress, etc. And men tend to be written kind of sullen, and I don't know. There are a lot of women writing for the show, and again, I think that's a positive thing, and directing the show. Yeah, it's just a strange thing, but again, with John and Maureen, initially they're heading toward divorce, and then they, of course, fall back in love over the course of the season. Fine. the things I like a lot of the character stuff. I like a lot of the acting. I like the fact that the robot. I like the design of the robot first of all, and I like the fact the robot is from an alien ship and an alien culture. And is it evil? Is it good? Is it reliable? The relationship between Will and the robot is really good. And Parker Posey, I really like her as Dr. Smith slash June Harris. And of course, June Harris is two of the actors' names from the original Lost in Space. June Lockhart and Jonathan Harris jammed together as June Harris. Fun. And the fact that she stole Dr. Smith's identity from a character being played by Bill Mumy from the original show. I hope he reemerges. I hope he reappears. I'll have to go back and watch the first episode and see if he was killed. He was definitely wounded. But all that stuff is fine. And the fact that the meteor or comet or whatever that hit Earth turns out to be an alien spaceship, and we stole the drive from that alien ship, and now the aliens want it back. I mean, all that stuff I think is fun, and and the ticking clock of we got to get off this planet because it's going to fall into a black hole or be ripped apart by a black hole. Again, that's all well and good, and I like it. And so overall, it's sort of like it's not the great reinvention that Battlestar Galactica was, where you had what in my opinion was a very mediocre show turned into a great show by Ron Moore. You know, I mean, the original Battlestar Galactica, which I didn't particularly like. And then it became a great show with Ron Moore's interpretation. Lost in Space, it was a kind of a funky show that I have great affection for. You know, kids, when you're a kid, you'll have affection for stuff that may not objectively be great, but because you saw it when you were a kid, you love it. And, again, following my dictum that kids have no taste, but that's fine. And so I really have great affection for the original Lost in Space, as do many people. But again, there was a great cast with great chemistry, and the robot design was terrific. And Bob May, Bob May played the robot, the physical robot, and the voice was performed by another actor. And again, that all worked. But in the new Lost in Space, it's a very fun show. Parker Posey, I think, is really good, and it's a really interestingly written character, very complex, and really a sociopath, and that's very interesting. And then, of course, at the end of the season, they pull the rabbit out of the hat of, oh my God, the hyperspace opens up, and suddenly they're drawn back to the alien planet where this ship comes from, or the alien ship comes from, and it's like danger, and it's like, okay, that's like a left curve. I mean, one of the things I also liked about the new show was that it wasn't just this family alone left to their devices. There were a lot of other people and potentially other characters, which again made it interesting and different and logical that these families would be going to Alpha Centauri after Earth is devastated by this crash of the alien ship. And for the next season, I guess there won't be these human characters, these other human characters. It'll just be the family dealing with aliens. Who knows? Who knows how that'll go? We'll find out, won't we? So again, the basic conclusion I have is I like the show. I can get past the weaker parts of the show, the more goofy parts of the show. It hasn't degenerated into total silliness, which is good, which is what happened with a lot of the original Lost in Space, where you had, I think, did they have the giant vegetables on the original Lost in Space? I believe they did. And they also had a monster that was just a guy in a sheet. And I said, boy, they're going to pull off that sheet and you'll see this horrible monster. And Elaine said, no, they're just cheap and it's just going to be a guy in a sheet. And it was just a guy in a sheet as the monster. It's like, oh man. But that said, so it got through the season. It's interesting. Twists and turns are interesting. The larger story arc is interesting, and I'll certainly watch the next season. And of course, Westworld is back, so I'm watching that. And the other thing that's really cool, by the way, is YouTube. First of all, we can have our own Mr. Sci-Fi channel, but also back in 2004, in the previous video, I mentioned that in 2004, the famed action director John Woo did a pilot in 2004 of Lost in Space for the WB or the CW, whatever iteration it was, then I think it was the WB, that never got picked up as a series. Well, it's there on YouTube. You can watch it. So I started to watch it, and it's because I heard that there were certain elements from that pilot that were used in this one, and it's interesting to see because you have John as sort of a military guy who doesn't really communicate well with Will, and because Will is sort of the brainiac, the brainy kid, and John's the man of action, and he and his wife have friction over that. And in that version, Will builds his own robot, And so that's interesting. And the robot design is not good, but you can watch that whole pilot, and that's kind of a cool thing, that these pilots that you used to not be able to see anywhere, now you can find them on YouTube, as you can find many other rarities and interesting things. So that's about it for now. We're going to do a video soon about where Space Command is right now. Space Command's coming along well, and lots to talk about. And I'll do one about The Expanse soon, and as Westworld progresses into its second season, we'll be chiming in about that. Many other things over the fullness of time. So that's it. If you haven't subscribed to the Mr. Sci-Fi channel, please do. And again, if you're interested in some, donating to Space Command or buying a share in Space Command, reach out to me, Marc Zicree at gmail.com. There'll be lots more adventures coming down the pike. And that's it for now. Talk to you soon. Bye.